Saddle up your horses.
Pitter patter, let's get at her. It is another episode of the Manely Broncos Podcast, and we are excited because this is going to be the first installment of a free agency deep dive. And obviously, we're going to be hitting all the position groups and all the positions in general for the Denver Broncos team before free agency kicks off. And actually, we're going to be doing this twice. And the reason why we're actually going to be doing it twice is obviously come training camp, there's times where you got to do almost a deep dive into training camp. You know, once all the free agency is settled, once all the draft is settled, we take a little bit of a deep dive into the positional battles and stuff like that. So this will be our first deep dive into the position groups. But before we get into any of that, Brandon, the partner in crime, is in the building with, of course, the greatest representation and the greatest victory of them all that happened within that Super Bowl Sunday, and that was getting the Deadpool 3 trailer as he is supporting the background with Deadpool down there in the back.
Well, this was supposed to be Fake Life Fighting Real Pain, but I'm blocking the caption. I need to move it up to the top somehow because that's just how I'm feeling at this point. I mean, games happened over the weekend that I don't care about, and the only thing I care about is the Deadpool and Wolverine trailer. So let's just start there with the Deadpool Wolverine trailer, because I don't want to talk about what
that's a lot to unpack.
That let me see that. Deadpool with hair. Never thought I'd see that in my lifetime. Still don't know how to react to it. It was something. But it's did you see that it's the most viewed trailer of all time already? That's insane. Yeah. That's ridiculous.
See,
out for less than a week.
The one thing that, I mean, it's good marketing by the Super Bowl team, like whenever they do the trailers. But I will tell you, I think that was the first. Trailer that dropped was the Deadpool trailer. But I was so mad when that. But I was so mad when that trailer came out because it was 30 seconds. And granted, like every single trailer that they played in the, in that Super Bowl was like 30 seconds, and so it was basically up to you to go to Twitter and watch the full Twitter yourself, while, of course, the Super Bowl is going on. Of course, new commercials are happening. So it's entirely your prerogative, right?
It wasn't even a trailer. It was a teaser. And the teaser was like, go watch the trailer online. Like the full trailer was online. So they made people actually have to go look it up, and it's still the most viewed trailer. Like Deadpool's got to go. And like, that's making it harder for people to find your trailer, and they still go find it, and it's still the most watched trailer of all time. I mean, I'm not surprised, but I just can't wait for July. That's all I'm going to say. And the intro that is definitely not safe for work of how he meets the TVA.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to. I'm not going to quote it. I want to quote it, but I'm not going to quote it.
We'll just say this.
I'm surprised they did that.
We'll just say this.
I mean, it's very Deadpool, but I'm surprised they showed it in the trailer. Go ahead.
We'll just say this in terms of not to spoil anything. If you guys haven't seen Loki at all, and you guys don't know anything about the TVA, it's probably worth freshening up yourself on possibly the TVA. And
you have to.
Yeah, you have to
watch this movie
if you're going to have to. Yeah,
but I haven't seen season 2 yet because I just keep forgetting that it's out. To be honest,
there's a lot to watch.
So I might have to do that first, because you never know what I'm gonna find out there.
But anyway, what I was gonna say real quick is that the Deadpool trailer, when it came out and they only played it for 30 seconds, like that teaser, I immediately went into my phone. Like I immediately went to my phone and watched the full trailer as new commercials were going on. So like there were other new commercials that I was missing because of the fact that Deadpool took priority, that they just dropped the Deadpool Wolverine, trailer.
Honestly, that teaser trailer already one of the best like the Super Bowl trailers this year. I feel like the Super Bowl commercials were kind of They weren't
But
that good.
it's always been that way.
But I feel like they've been better. I feel like they've been better, at least than they were this year. Like you got the Wasn't Me Cheetos Shaggy trailer. I think that was last year or 2 years ago, which was incredible. You had the Mr. Clean trailer that was like super good or commercial that was super good a couple years ago. And then this year it was kind of like, I don't really have one that sticks out other than obviously Deadpool. I think my favorite one was maybe the Duncan one with that Tom Brady surprisingly starred in. That was pretty good. But unfortunately, these things came at the cost of we had to watch the Super Bowl to see them. And Patrick Mahomes, that's all I'm going to say.
Well, it's the little things that matter for, of course, Bronco fans and stuff, the little things that matter. So like we said, this is going to be a fun episode. We are going to take a deep dive into free agency, take a deep dive into some of the position groups, and obviously it's not going to be compiled into one episode. It's not going to be compiled into one episode. It's going to be features all the way up until the free agency legal tampering period begins, which I think is March 11th. I think is March 11th is when that window opens. And we know,
I don't know, man. Sean Payton knows our coach. I might start something that. Don't get caught.
Yeah, you never know. He might have already done his tampering on Radio Row with some of the people that he was possibly mentioning.
And just come out to the boat.
Yeah,
show up on the boat. I'm just going to randomly send your agent a pin on Google Maps and not say what it's about or where it is or what's going to happen there. If anyone somehow doesn't know, this is in relation to what happened with Tom Brady 3 years ago.
Right. Before we dive into any of that, obviously Clayton, one of our super fans, already chimed in with our first talking point before we get into any of the free agency stuff, and he actually says that he loves the hiring of Jim Leonhard, and of course Pete Carmichael. Let's lead it off first because obviously that was the news that really actually.
I saw the report while I was watching the game.
Well, it came out right before the game. Like it came out right before the game, and like it's one of those things, man. Like I was surprised. I was surprised to see the Broncos be maybe that aggressive for a defensive backs coach, right? That aggressive for a defensive backs coach. And I'll just start first. We'll get into Pete Carmichael a little bit, but as I was saying a little bit on the 5280 podcast, Jim Leonhard, his name was a hot commodity. His name was a hot commodity with both the college football circles and NFL circles. Last year, I think he had a couple interviews for a defensive coordinator job. And in college, I think that there were a few teams that were really eyeing him for not just defensive coordinator jobs for college teams, but also head coaching jobs for him, at college. And so, I mean, like, and of course, he's a former Bronco too. Like,
well, I was about to say, for people that don't know, he played on the Broncos. He also played on the Saints.
He played on the Saints. He's a former Bronco from like 2012. So he's been coached by Gary Seaback. And I think that if you're looking at it from the NFL perspective, that's I think what makes Leonhard so fun is he's got rich history as far as some of the coaches that he's played with. I will say he's played maybe the majority of his career with Rex Ryan and the Ryan family. Like when he was with the Saints, he played obviously with Rob Ryan. And then, of course, Rex Ryan when I think he was with the Jets, and then, of course, with Buffalo. But also, I think the one that goes a little bit unnoticed was he also was with John Harbaugh. He played with he played for John Harbaugh in John Harbaugh's first year as coach of the Baltimore Ravens back in like 2008.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So, I mean, so he is well versed in terms of all the different coaching that he's been accumulating over the years, and it's clearly shown with what he's been able to, have as far as a head coach is concerned. And I mean, I don't know about you, Brandon, but I'll go right off on the bat on this. I think that this is, I don't want to say bad news for Vance Joseph, because
You're literally stealing my point.
Because this isn't necessarily, I'm not trying to actually come across and be like, this, because like that this is bad news for Vance Joseph, because that comes out wrong, and that's not my intention. But this very well could be a defensive coordinator in waiting, something that obviously we were hoping that could happen with Christian Parker at some point, but never really materialized, never really happened. I think Jim Leonard, regardless of possibly what even happens with Vance, unless he's got like a top 5 unit, it feels like at some point Vance could be a scapegoat at some point, maybe near the end of the season, and then Leonard is the one that gets the promotion.
I'll say it. This might be bad news for Vance Joseph. That was literally what I was gonna say. Is the two things that entered my head when I first saw this announcement hiring. First was, I mean, okay, obviously losing Christian Parker sucked, right? Like everyone is on board with like, we wanted to keep him, we wanted to hide him, we don't want people to know how good he was. If you're gonna replace him, which, I mean, I know people would say he's irreplaceable, like you can't just replace him straight up. This is probably the best person you could possibly hire to replace him. That was the first thought that went into my head. The second thought that crossed my mind was Vance Joseph might be on a slightly warmer seat than he previously was. Because the reason that this is such a great hire and such a great replacement for Parker is like Leonard is such a good defensive mind and good defensive coach and just a great coach in general that people are surprised, and I'm shocked that he took a defensive backs. And I know it's not just defensive backs, it's like defensive backs and defensive passing coordinator, game coordinator, and all that stuff, but that he took a positional coaching job in the NFL because people were legitimately saying, like, eyeing him as like he's going to be a defensive coordinator. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how, like, wait. Did you not know this, Big Mike? I just saw this.
Admittedly, it did happen. It did happen. Like, was it like an hour before? No, it wasn't even an hour before kickoff. It was like, it was literally an hour.
It was so close to kickoff that I didn't see it. I was literally watching the game, and it was on a commercial break, and I opened Twitter and I saw the news. Like, I saw it during the game because I didn't.
The point is, like,
attention before it, like, right at the kickoff. It was right there, so like it was pretty easy to miss. But it was such a surprise because, like, again, so many people were thinking he's going to be a defensive coordinator in the NFL, or he's going to take another head coaching gig in college, which the reason I say another is like he was technically the interim. Did they ever take the interim tag off? He was the interim head coach at
no. In fact, actually, a lot of people, me and myself included, actually thought that
he was going to stay there.
That he was going to stay there.
Yeah, and then he went to Illinois, which is kind of weird, just like for a single year.
Well, to be fair, though, it actually ended up being a really smart move for him because Brett Bielema is the head coach at Illinois, and Bielema has Wisconsin ties. And so it makes a lot of sense to be, with that Wisconsin ties. And for Illinois, like, I mean, they at least, what seemed to be a progress in terms of what they built in 2022. I mean, let's not forget, like, what they had in 22. That was a loaded roster in 2022. But then for some reason in 2023, it was a disappointment. And he was only hired as an analyst, if you will.
Yeah. And that's why it's surprising, is it kind of seems like he had like, if he wanted it, he probably could have stayed on as Wisconsin's head coach.
Yeah. But of course,
Anyway.
Wisconsin went out there and was aggressive and decided to
They took
hire
Luke
Luke Fickell. Yeah.
Anyway, that's why it was so surprising, is because he's such a great coach. People definitely were thinking he's going to be defensive coordinator. He's going to be a head coach, and at the college level, he's going to be defense coordinator at the NFL level. Maybe even some people were thinking he's going to get head coaching interviews at the NFL. I don't know, but I can't imagine. I mean, obviously, could this be true? Sure, but I can't imagine that he took this positional job without there being some kind of discussion of, I'm not saying they said you're going to be the heir apparent as our defensive coordinator, but I feel like at some point it had to have been brought up, or him having more of an expanded role. Like there's something going on here that I would not be surprised at all if he's our defensive coordinator
next year,
or even midway through this year if Vance puts out, because we turned it around, but this defense was historically bad for the beginning of the season, and we turned it around because we had just an unprecedented turnover margin luck, which I say luck because some of it is luck. You can't, and obviously I'm not trying to take anything away from Vance Joseph. He did a great job turning it around. He got rid of guys that should have been gotten rid of. He played guys that needed to have an opportunity to start, and they proved that he was right. And he did an amazing job, but how sustainable is that? Because we were just taking away the ball at a literally historic pace. I don't know if that's gonna, that cannot continue. So even if you're not going to promote him to be your eventual defensive coordinator, having a guy like Jim Leonhard in that staff, or on that staff in that room, just can't hurt you by any means, but it does give you a great additional defensive mind to kind of make sure that the ship stays righted, or give you a guy that you can slot in as your defensive coordinator next year, or even the middle of the year. You could switch to him. He's that good.
Or even at some point, down the line, the long game, right? And we've said that a little bit with Sean Payton. We want to say thank you guys again.
When people go ahead.
Sorry. We want to say thank you guys again for hopping in and watching on the stream. If you got, and one of the things we found out too, of course, with X and with Twitter, is that your comments will be featured on the stream. We've actually noticed that in the last month or so. So if you guys are commenting on the Twitter stream, or have yet to comment, you guys can feel free, and your comment will be aired. Also, we are broadcasting on Twitch as well. We're broadcasting on Twitch. So make sure you go whichever platform you prefer, and chime in there. There was a really good article, and still talking about Jim Leonhard. There was a really good article I got a chance to share from SI, and this was actually back when, I don't know whether or not he was actually named interim, but it was back when he was still associated with Wisconsin. And it was a really good article. If you guys get a chance to see it, I shared it. It was Monday, February 12th. I got a chance to share it, and it gives a really good description of who he is as, maybe a player, but also a coach. And I took a little bit of a blurb out. And described it in terms of what his coaching trend is. And it's a superb blurb, and I may be a little bit long-winded, but this is what it says. Leonhard is widely regarded as one of the top defensive coordinators in all of college football. While he utilizes a base 3-4 scheme in his defense, his defense deploys various fronts with a 2-4-5 design regularly used against pass-heavy teams. And keep that in mind once he becomes the defensive coordinator, or I should say if he becomes a defensive coordinator with the Broncos, and in terms of the AFC West division. Against pass-heavy teams, Leonhard is known for using an array of stunts and blitzes, blitz packages to aggressively attack offenses while leaving his defensive backs in man-to-man coverage. Not zone coverage, man-to-man coverage. That is not to say he does not use zone coverage ever, but Leonhard uses a lot of movement and misdirection to keep offenses guessing, regardless of the coverage. So that gives you just a little bit of a sense of, how good his defenses are. And if you're just looking strictly at Wisconsin, Wisconsin has always had really, really good defenses. I mean, you look at, even though the what is it, the Big Ten West was always, second rate to, the what is it, the Big Ten, the other division, the other primo division with Ohio State and Michigan State and all those other really good teams, if you will, and now with obviously USC and UCLA entering the mix, and now Washington and Oregon, there's not gonna be those divisions anymore. But like we're talking about Wisconsin and Iowa being primo division like defenses to try and stop those teams, and there was a reason why both those teams, particularly Wisconsin, was like number one or one of the top defenses in the country. So, and Leonard was a prime example why they were. So,
yeah. And the thing I was just going to say before was you hear all the time about why people don't, or why teams don't fire coaches midseason. And the reason is usually because like, who's going to replace them? Again, I'm not saying anything about Vance Joseph, but if you have Jim Leonhard on the roster, I mean, I feel like, or in the staff, it's going to be like that barrier would be removed if the need would arise. And I'm not saying it will. Like, for all intents and purposes, like Vance Joseph could have locked in his job security and can have a field another amazing defense next year and pick up where we left off, and it's fantastic and it's not an issue at all. Yeah. But having Jim Leonhard gives you some flexibility that if you
player relatability
had to make a change because you have a similar historic collapse on that side of the ball, like we did this year, then you have a guy you probably can trust to take over. So
that wasn't
it was surprising. And then obviously Pete Carmichael, that was expected. Like, if we didn't hire him, I would have been probably concerned that he like hates Sean Payton or something. But that one was kind of like, obviously, who else was on Sean Payton's staff that we don't have yet, right?
Well, and for Pete Carmichael, we actually interviewed Ross Jackson, friend of the show. He does stuff for Locked On Saints. You may actually remember this, Brandon, but like when we had a chance to interview him or sit down with Ross, he mentioned Pete Carmichael as an option for offensive coordinator. Like even before Joe Lombardi, like, there were a few candidates that he was kind of rolling in. There were possible offensive coordinator candidates. Obviously, Joe Lombardi was one. But I think he mentioned Carmichael. He also mentioned Ronald Curry as an option. So I mean, like, yeah, he threw around that possible name as an offensive coordinator, and obviously things didn't necessarily go as planned. Obviously, things didn't go necessarily as planned, if you will, maybe down there with New Orleans. But it was pretty easy decision for him. Let's go to a place where I'm comfortable, where I'm safe, and I know that I can, go to a place where I'm going to be trusted. And of course, with Joe Lombardi down there with the Broncos, and now Pete Carmichael, it's like getting the gang back together with Sean Payton and it should be
Saints.
The Denver Saints again. So the purge of the Saints continues, and it's going to be a lot of fun to watch. I think that it's pretty clear, though. I think the thing for me isn't necessarily what will Pete Carmichael do as far as an influence. I think if I was to spin this a little bit to Sean Payton, is like people had to have this idea that Sean Payton like possibly is like a dictator, if you will. But I think like, and maybe this is just a way, that maybe some of those people, guys like a Lombardi and maybe even a Carmichael, they understand how a Sean Payton operates, right? They know exactly how he operates, and they love how he operates, and so much so that they're going to join forces with him again, because they know exactly how he operates, they know exactly how it is, and they actually want to be able to make that work. So the fact that Carmichael is, joining the Broncos in that capacity, I think it's going to be good, especially too for the offense, of course.
Yeah. You can't have enough talented offensive minds in on a team. And obviously, Sean Payton continues to be the de facto offensive coordinator. He's going to call the plays. He's going to set everything up. But, give him his guys. I trust, obviously, whatever decision he makes. And he clearly feels comfortable with the people that he worked with in New Orleans. And I'm surprised we haven't hired more of them. Just bring on the Denver Saints. Like, that's going to be what's going to happen.
So let's take a dive. Let's take that dive into the NFL free agency list. And actually, what we'll do when we'll do this, and Brendan, you kind of know how this operates now. What we'll do is we'll look at the room in general. We'll look at the room in general, and then we'll take a look at it from the free agency pool, and then we'll look at some of the player prospects, if you will, that are in free agency. So we'll look at our room first, as far as the position that we start with, and then we'll dive a little bit into free agency in that position, then we'll move on to the next position. So what do you want to start with first? And obviously,
go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, since Big Mike is in the house, he was the guy that commented on one of my posts when I was asking about positions, and he mentioned wide receiver. And so I think it's only fitting that we talk about wide receiver. And of course, one of the more favorable comments, of course, was the defensive line. So we're going to do a little bit something different to kick things off for free agency. And we're going to talk about the wide receiver position, and we'll talk about the defensive line. And when we talk about the defensive line, it's not going to be just the interior. It's going to be the exterior, of course. The pass rushers, the defensive ends. We're going to talk about that as well. So why don't we start first, though? Yeah, why don't we start first with the wide receiver position?
I was going to say, let's start with wide receiver. We're already talking about offense, and that's going to be obviously the focus of this team moving forward is how can we improve the offense? We're going to be looking at quarterbacks in the draft. We're going to be looking at quarterbacks on free agency. We're like, as much as we focused on defense for so many years, and as much as we probably still need to, because we definitely have holes on that side of the ball, we didn't bring Sean Payton in because he's going to fix the defense.
Right. Let's preface this by saying, it too, that the wide receiver position is going to be an expected shakeup, regardless of, and Brandon and I have been mentioning this even throughout the season, is that regardless of how you feel about Courtland Sutton or even Jerry Jeudy, even if they both stay, right? Even if they both stay and they like the idea of Sutton being on the roster, they like the idea of Jerry Jeudy being on the roster, with the draft class that's rolling in, it's really smart to take a stab at the wide receiver class in the draft, but also probably take a little bit of a dip into the wide receiver pool and see who's out there. Because the one thing that we know, and this is a nice little really smart way to look at the overall process of free agency and the way that they do it, is that teams typically fill their needs in free agency, and then they look to the draft to fill their depth roles and stuff like that. And I mean, that's
the smart way to do it.
That's the smart way to do it. But obviously, we know that the first round, second round, or sometimes maybe even the third round a little bit, you start kind of lumping in the possibility that are these guys actually going to be starters or even contributors, with this team. But that's the composite. That's the overall look at it as far as how teams, and smart way, the way to look at it. But we're going to start with wide receiver. Now we should make mention that Big Mike did throw his name in the ring. He's like 5'11". He's a yak monster. That's what he told me. That's what Big Mike told me, is that he's 5'11". He's a yak monster. So we'll at least put him, on the list. And of course, with the Broncos doing for season ticket holder tryouts, I'll make sure that we can put Big Mike's name in the ring.
All right. So Big Mike is the 1A, right?
That's right.
So I think the first thing we should start here, obviously, and you kind of touched on this already, is I feel fairly confident in saying one of these wide receivers is going to be traded. Courtland Sutton or Jerry Jeudy is going to be traded in this offseason.
The only confidence is who will it be?
The only thing I'm not confident on is who it's going to be. I think depending on who we see gets moved, that will dictate more of, I think, maybe who we should look at. If you had to say, like, gut instinct right now, who do you think gets traded between the two? Because there was still also that that kind of shadow report that we never confirmed and no one could say who it was, where there was like someone that was willing to offer, was a second and a third, I think, for Jerry Jeudy, or something that was fairly high.
Yeah.
And I think at the time we had speculated it was the Panthers, but who do you think actually gets traded?
Well, I'll tell you what, the one move that really is in the back of my mind that makes me think it's going to be this wide receiver is Courtland Sutton. I think it's going to be Courtland Sutton. For one, I don't necessarily know what the trade value is for Jerry Jeudy. I don't know what the trade value is for Jerry Jeudy. We also know what the trade value is probably going to be in terms of how high that trade value is going to be for Courtland Sutton, especially given the year that he had.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that Sutton is the one that boasts the better trade value for you to get.
Trade value.
Yeah, for you to possibly squeak in the possibility of a top 100 draft pick. And if you can,
go ahead.
And if you can get that, you know, and the reason why I also say Courtland Sutton is because of the Allen Lazard rumor that had been floating around last year about him possibly even being a Denver Bronco. And that's a wide receiver. That's a wide receiver that he may not necessarily compare favorably to said Courtland Sutton, but we know that Allen Lazard and Sutton, those are 50-50 guys, right? Those are 50-50, I'm going to go up and get it, wide receiver guys. Now, I think where it gets a little bit flexible for you to move on from Courtland Sutton. Now, this is a risky proposition, but it's also with what you do with Tim Patrick. Because I feel like, and you and I have had this conversation before, even during the season, but the moment you let go of Courtland Sutton, I feel like is a window of opportunity that also Tim Patrick comes back on a much lesser deal to be in that room. That's not going to affect what we look for in free agency, but I think that that's necessarily the direction that they go. So I think it's going to be Courtland Sutton.
Yeah, my only question for you there is, I think the downside to his trade value is going to be his contract.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, granted, compared to some of the contracts we're seeing lately, is it awful? No. But it was what, 4 years, 60 million or something like that. And he is technically only through the 2025 season, but I don't know. I think that could kind of drag it down a little bit. He's 28. That's not exactly old for a wide receiver, but he also had that significant injury a couple years ago with the ACL. So you never really know. He kind of did have a nice bounce back, but I think I agree. I think trading him, he has the highest trade value between the two of them. And I think that he also gives you some cap relief because Jerry Jeudy is still on that rookie deal.
Mm-hmm.
And you obviously need the cap relief, especially with whatever you're going to do with Russell Wilson. But I have a different direction I'd go with this as well. But go ahead.
Well, and the other thing I was just going to say too is this is not necessarily me speaking from, the Jerry Jeudy fan and wanting him to, succeed in terms of like, because I want him to succeed, right? But I think that schematically, he fits better with what Sean Payton wants to operate as an offense. Jerry Jeudy. I think Jerry Jeudy does just a little bit. As far as
we don't even know because because Russ wasn't the guy for that system.
Right.
So it's kind of a little bit of an unknown.
But I think what we were able to see though was kind of what we were all predicting, which was one, he really liked Jarrett Stidham's ability, to get him the ball in space. And we saw that quite often, if you will, or a fair amount as far as him getting the ball in space, right? And near the end of the regular season. And so I think that's the idea of, a guy like Jerry Jeudy is getting him in space and having him operate like in the middle of the field, and because we know that he's not a 50-50 guy. I think Jerry Jeudy is like going to be a really fascinating one, and I'll tell you, if we're going to take a little bit of a deeper dive into free agency, I wonder how much of or aggressive we'll be looking at some of these guys. Like, let's see, what was it? Actually, Big Mike mentioned actually one of the possibilities for a free agent. Actually, one of those days earlier. He said Michael Pittman. He said Michael Pitt being a free agent. I'm fascinated by this idea too, because like if you do move on from a guy like Courtland Sutton, it goes back to a little bit of the Alan Lazard comment. You can go out and possibly bring in a much younger, much cheaper option. I don't know if you would. Well, cheaper is a relative term, like in the sense of like, because you have no idea what deal that, said person is going to get. But I mean, you have T. Higgins that's out there, but I feel like T. Higgins is going to be getting a fair money deal to where he's going to be pricing himself out of the Broncos range. But I mean, like a Michael Pittman for me would make a decent amount of sense, for possibly what Sean Payton would want to do. And frankly, I could see this is a little bit of a hot take. I'm not necessarily saying the Broncos will do this, but I could see them looking at their wide receiver room and also wanting to be a little bit of an upgrade, if you will, and like wanting to upgrade that room. And so I think that there is a window of opportunity that you could say sign a Michael Pittman. And this is one where I'm really pounding the table for. What would be really fun? It would be really fun for me is I like the idea of Calvin Ridley with Sean Payton. He's 31. He's 31, but I like the idea of Calvin Ridley, being in that Sean Payton offense and a guy that can truly operate within space and
He's
operate.
29.
He's 29. I don't know.
I was like, what are you looking at? He ain't 30 yet?
No. He's almost 30. There we go. He's almost 30. I gave him the benefit. I gave him.
He just turned 29 December.
Yeah. So, but Calvin Ridley is a guy that I'm.
Yeah. So he's up there. Let me kind of explain my slight hot take. So I think I agree with you in that I think Courtland Sutton gets traded. Here's my question: is do you think they could somehow find a way as well out of the Tim Patrick contract too? Like, do you think Tim Patrick for sure comes back? Because I could see a scenario where both of them are gone.
Oh, there's definitely a situation where both of them are gone.
I don't see this team going all in on one of the big name wide receivers. Like I don't think
like a T. Higgins
is remotely in the picture.
Yeah,
I think Michael Pittman is all out of the picture, to be honest. Mike Evans is way out of the picture. There's no way they're letting him get out of Tampa Bay with Baker.
Right.
Calvin Ridley is interesting. I think there's some guys, though, that like if I had to guess, and let's say they do this idea that I had of like, okay, Courtland Sutton is gone and Tim Patrick is gone, I'd say that they then go after maybe like a more of a mid-tier wide receiver in free agency, and then they draft someone, because this is also a very good wide receiver draft. And when I say draft someone, I mean draft someone like high. I know right now we have a first and then a third. We could probably find a way. Let's say we get a second for Courtland Sutton, using that on a wide receiver. I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, I know like I am hardly the first person to be on the train for Jawan Jennings, but I am on the Jawan Jennings train.
Yeah,
I think after the Super Bowl, like the price for that train went up a little bit, but I don't think it's not insane. I think we can afford it.
Let me say
if they won that game, he was probably their Super Bowl MVP.
Yeah. Yeah, he probably was. But to your Jennings point, here, let me say this.
And I love him, but like in that tier of not horribly overpriced, but still a solid wide receiver. Go ahead.
Well, let me phrase this way. So, Jawan Jennings is a restricted free agent, which means that the 49ers will probably tender him a first-round tender, is my guess, if he stays. Or they could just scrap or they could just scrap the idea of the tender in general and just sign him probably to an extension anyway. So anyway, that being said, anybody that doesn't necessarily know restricted and stuff is like, if a team puts a first round tender on him, basically you're also forking over a first round draft pick to the 49ers for Jawan Jennings. So the question for you, Brandon,
that's obviously right. Like you have to take that into account, but I have no way of knowing if that's what they do.
But the question is Jawan Jennings worth, and given the wide receiver class that we have, or going to possibly
be worth the first round pick?
Is he worth
not
a
even
first
close? Round? Not even. Okay. No, absolutely not at all. Obviously, I'm making this wish without knowing if that's what they do. You never know. I mean, they could do that. If they do, then I'm probably out on him. But I mean, just in that tier of he's a good wide receiver, but he's not like you have to break the bank for him, right? Like in that same tier could be, well, this might be probably a bit lower of a tier player, but like Ray McLeod, also ironically from San Francisco, who's
just don't put him on punt return.
Pretty okay. Don't put him on punt return, but he's been pretty okay. You got guys like I don't know if he's
I got a fascinating one
in that range, but like DJ Chark, I think he might be a bit higher.
What about Donovan Peoples-Jones?
Josh Reynolds, maybe. DPJ is an interesting one. So, like in that tier. Marquise Brown is a free agent. He's got to be making. He's going to make a lot of money. Josh Reynolds from the Lions could be a guy to look at.
It's a name that obviously
there's some guys out there, but I don't see them going all in on a high end. T. Higgins, Mike Evans, Pittman for me is in that tier. I don't see them doing that.
Here's a fascinating reclamation project for wide receiver. Let's just go with this. Laviska Shenault. He's from Colorado. Do you sign? I think that's a very low risk, high reward type move for you, right? You bring him in. He adds obviously a lot of versatility, right? He adds a lot of versatility with the room. It's funny. I was looking at Darnell Mooney. Darnell Mooney is a fascinating one for me. If you want to talk about the Jerry Jeudy syndrome, possibly, and if you're going to compare the two, and like, and possibly like say maybe were their talent wasted, where they're at, I would say that maybe Darnell Mooney would almost fall into that category of, was Mooney wasted in Chicago because of, the progress and the development of a guy like a Justin Fields and, or whoever they had there at quarterback. But Laviska Shenault is
Shenault to me, that is just so
25 years old.
He's so interesting to me. And the reason I say that is he's had probably some of the worst luck for a wide receiver going into the NFL maybe ever. Like, I know that that's kind of hyperbole, but he was his rookie year there was 2020, right?
Really wanted it bad.
The year before Trevor Lawrence gets there. He's rookie, you never know. He was kind of Then 2021 comes in. Yeah, you get Trevor Lawrence. It's kind of like, oh, yes. They have a great wide receiver throwing the ball. Urban Meyer was the head coach. I'm throwing that entire season out. Yeah. That season doesn't count in Shenault's career. Like, as a rookie, he had 600 yards, almost 60 catches. He had 5 touchdowns. Like, he was okay. Then he goes in 2021 and just complete dumpster fire of an organization for that entire year.
Carolina.
Then he goes to the Panthers.
Yeah.
Jumps from one dumpster fire to another dumpster fire. So Shenault, I would take flyer on Shenault. I would do it. You give him a guy like Sean Payton who actually knows what he's doing. You take him out of the Panthers, just absolute mess of an organization. You take him out of, I mean, obviously Urban Meyer is no longer in Jacksonville. If Chenault was still with the Jaguars, I think he would be
He might even
much better. He's probably still there.
Yeah, he's probably still there.
Or
price himself out of there.
I feel bad for Laviska Chenault, man.
But
I wouldn't be surprised. I would not be surprised if you take a flyer on him, and I probably would. He's 25.
And I say Chenault because we'll talk about the quarterback position too in future episodes, but I kind of look at him almost in the same vein of like a Sam Darnold, like like how you look at a guy like the Sam Darnold conversation. It's a reclamation project, but not just that. Like Chenault also would fall in line depending on where he goes and the coach that maybe falls in love with him. You're also talking about almost a poor man's Deebo Samuel with possibly the situation that he could go to, right? Now, obviously, durability, injuries, everything, is going to be into that equation. And obviously, Chenault has been injured, a decent amount, I should say. But I definitely have Chenault's name. And frankly, I think it's certainly possible that the Broncos do add multiple players to that position. And Chenault, like a Sam Darnold in this way, does not take you at all from drafting another wide receiver either in that first round or in the second round or whatever. So
you want another super reclamation project?
Chase Claypool. Were you gonna say Chase? Oh, I thought you were gonna say Chase Claypool.
Jalen Reagor's a free agent.
Oh man, Jalen Reagor. Speaking of the Jerry Jeudy class,
I don't know how to feel about him. I'd be way more in on Chenault than I would be on Jalen Reagor. But I did kind of like him coming out of TCU. He was that monster speed guy, and then he kind of just died.
There were two names. There were two names that I really, really liked. Actually, I liked that wide receiver class in general, but like there were two names that I also really liked, and it was Jalen Reagor and Denzel Mims.
Denzel Mims is a good one.
Yeah. But there are some definite options. I think that the Broncos could go.
Yeah, I think if you get rid of Courtland Sutton, specifically he's the one that gets traded, then that gives you more clarity on what they're going to be trying to do, because that you need more of that X guy, which Tim Patrick could also be. I don't know. I think it also, you have to look at the draft and what we could potentially do there, because this is a very good wide receiver draft. So again, that's why I think, like, if we come out of the free agency period and the only guy we sign is Laviska Shenault and we've traded Courtland Sutton, I wouldn't be that upset, because I'm looking at this as we're probably also going to draft a guy or two in this upcoming draft. And there's some names there that
we'll talk about the draft later.
We'll get into, but there's
some names.
It's a really solid wide receiver class.
I don't know about you. We'll talk about the wide receiver class.
Lad. I just want Lad. That's all I'm saying.
Lad McConkey.
Lad McConkey.
Yeah, but I think that, like, and you and I will have this conversation, but I don't know about you, but it feels like the wide receiver class in general, ever since really 2020, has just gotten better every single year. Like, as far as the people that are just really good prospects and come in and just hit the ground running and are productive, like, immediately in year one. So
and I mean, Lad specifically, I feel like you're going to probably see people pushing him up into the top, like the first round discussion now after what he did at the Senior Bowl. But there's so many good wide receivers that, like, if he goes up that high, like, someone is going to fall farther than they should. Troy Franklin.
Well, I'll tell you,
Mitchell, Roman Wilson. Like, if they don't come out of this draft with at least one wide receiver, they messed up.
Well, and I'll tell you, he's not a wide receiver per se, but it's one of the reasons why I am so high on a guy like Brock Bowers, because he's a positionless player. Like, he's a positionless player, meaning you could play him a wide receiver.
Don't let Big Mike hear you.
Yeah, like, he's a positionless wide receiver.
Dulcich dead to you? Come on.
So I also think he's a top 10 like talent, like a pure talent, and he's one of those rare players that like if he's there at 12 and he's available, I'm not even.
Would you take him?
You
Or
know,
would you trade down? Let's say you had an offer to trade down,
I still
or
probably
Brock Bowers is your
I still probably
option.
obviously the quarterback is like the option for me, but it's almost like the who are your best non-quarterback options? Like if you took him, would you be really really happy with? Yeah,
Here's the thing with
Brock,
Brock Bowers. Go
yeah,
ahead. Go ahead.
but Brock Bowers would be in that category for me. But yeah,
I've seen Brock Bowers like this is very early and too early. I've seen people compare him to Travis Kelce, and I've seen people say that he's a Hall of Fame player. Like
almost like
that's ridiculous, but that's what I've seen people say. I don't know. And then you have to me, I'd have to overcome the mental hurdle of taking a first round tight end.
But that's the thing is like my thing is like you're not taking a tight end, you're taking a positionless player. Like it's almost like you're talking about like Dalton Kincaid, who people did compare to Kelsey.
Well,
Yeah,
you know
like,
who else was a positionless player that was taken the first round to a Vance Joseph team? Isaiah Simmons.
defensively, I would rather
a positionless player.
I would rather a positionless player on the offensive side of the ball.
Positionless player.
You know what I mean, though. I would rather have Sean Payton get his hands on a player like that than Vance Joseph, based on his history. All right, let's move to the defensive line. Let's go to the defensive line. This one is also fascinating. There are a lot of players that are on that market. There are a lot of players on the interior specifically. Let's start from the inside, and we'll work on the outside as far as the defensive line. The defensive line, I feel like you possibly could see some shakeup, and we'll probably maybe lump in some. Actually, I'll tell you what. Why do we lump in the position group as it is now on the defensive line, and then we'll talk about the exterior and interior as far as like positions and stuff. In free agency, I feel like the defensive line in general right now, Brandon, has at least a possibility to be a reworked room, like almost a reworked and almost a brand new room, to where you're almost talking about two remaining starters, or I should say remaining contributors, if you will, like main contributors that are staying. And like I'm a huge Mike Purcell fan, and I still think that there's a window of opportunity where we're talking about a player that is the Broncos have moved on from him, but he's also come back on a far more lesser deal and still played and at least within this last year played at a very high level or one of the the top players on that defensive line. So I still think there's a realm of possibility that Mike Purcell will be a Denver Bronco in 2024. But after that, you're only talking about Zach Allen, because the Jonathan Harris experiment throughout the season.
Harris is just
the Jonathan Harris experiment did not last long. Like it did not last long.
Well, here's the thing.
I shouldn't say it did not last long.
It didn't go. It didn't
go as planned.
It wasn't a successful experiment. Let's just go with that. Jonathan Harris is maybe a fine depth guy, but that's
kind of where we leave it.
That's kind of his ceiling to me.
Yeah.
And then I don't want to get into the Uwazurike situation.
It was
the defensive line. The defensive line might be one of our most. What's that?
Just the only thing that was surprising me with Uwazurike was he was not cut. That's the only thing.
I'm shocked. I'm literally shocked that he's technically still on this team.
Yeah.
He could face up to 2 years in prison and he's still on this team. Anyway, I don't know. Blows my mind. The defensive line, I think, has a legitimate argument of being the biggest hole on this team that's not quarterback. It's just not been good enough. Zach Allen was good. Yes, he pretty much was probably the best player on the defensive line. And I know like we're trying to kind of keep it separate from edge, but even though I love Baron Browning and I love Nick Bonito and I love Jonathan Cooper, like all those guys also kind of just look like good rotation players. Similar to like Jonathan Harris. So they look better than Jonathan Harris, but I think there's a lot of upgrades that need to be prioritized on this defensive line in a variety of places. And you look at the free agent class, like if we're going to spend anywhere in free agency, I would be more okay with spending on the defensive line. I mean, obviously Chris Jones, first of all, you can't afford him even if he doesn't stay in Kansas City, which he's staying in Kansas City.
He wants a lifetime contract, I feel.
Yeah,
plus,
he does. He does.
And plus he bet on himself too.
He did. You get into guys like DJ Reader, who I believe the last time he was a free agent, he was kind of like a popular player that we were kind of projecting to come to Denver. I think it was when he was on the Texans.
Yeah. No, you're right. Yeah.
I believe before he was signed to the Bengals. He's an interesting guy up there. Grover Stewart from Indy, who's over 30, could be interesting. I mean, these guys are kind of like up in the more, I mean, they're not Chris Jones level of contract, but they're probably going to be up there.
Mm-hmm.
Another guy, speaking of someone from the Texans that we might have some connection to, is that you've talked about is Sheldon Rankins, who obviously was drafted by the Saints when Sean Payton was there, and he's almost 30. He'll be 30 soon. So he's a guy you could probably get on a decent deal. Like similar to the wide receiver position in the draft, I feel like we can't come out of free agency and not have a defensive tackle that we've seen.
It's almost, and the reason why we haven't said his name is because he's going to be off the books. You can probably easily project this, is that the Broncos will move on from DJ Jones. Because the Broncos will probably move on from DJ Jones.
Oh, we haven't even touched on that yet.
Yeah, so that should be expected. But I just find it interesting that the Broncos, it's just the unfortunate nature of the business. You release a guy like a DJ Jones and, and you're trying to basically upgrade that position with frankly, to be blunt, a little bit of a better player, or possibly like what would fit, Vance Joseph, if you will. And maybe that goes to a guy like a Sheldon Rankins, right? And of course, too, for a team that is trying to get into the green, right, and save money, DJ Jones is a very logical candidate, right? I mean, DJ Jones is a very logical candidate. And frankly, I know I talked about Mike Purcell earlier, but one area where and I was going to ask you this is like, I would not be upset if the Broncos were aggressive in the defensive tackle market. I would not be surprised if the Broncos were aggressive in the defensive tackle market to where you didn't just sign one guy, but you signed another guy, right? It's almost like the argument of what we were having with the wide receiver position earlier right now. Because it was, you go out and you get like a Laviska Shenault, but you go out and you sign maybe a little bit more of a proven commodity like a Calvin Ridley, right? So you go out and you maybe sign a guy like that. But the reason why I say that is because do you go out and get a guy like a Tier Tart, right? Do you go out and get a Tier Tart, but do you go out and maybe spend, a little bit of money and maybe go out and sign a Javon Kinlaw, a young option who, according to Spot Track, this is interesting. According to Spot Track, his expected market value, which I would sign this in a heartbeat, is 2 years and $10 million. So $5 million a year.
For Tart?
No, for Javon Kinlaw.
Oh, Javon Kinlaw.
So if that's something, for the Broncos, like I would not be upset with the idea that they're going to go out and, sign a guy like a Javon Kinlaw. He's younger. They can obviously groom with the idea, within that defense. But yeah, Kinlaw's an option. Obviously, Christian Watkins would necessarily be a prized guy, if you will.
I'm going to say this once because I have to. Hey, Calais Campbell, you can still come home, man. You still come home to Denver.
Yeah.
You probably want to try to continue to win a ring because you're 37, but you're an ageless wonder, and I don't understand how you're still so good. Please come back.
Christian Watkins, for anybody that is wondering, is the market value for him is 4 years, $80 million.
Wow. I think I'm gonna be out on that.
Sheldon Rankins,
just a little bit.
Sheldon Rankins was 3 for 30, if you will.
I'll take it. I'll
3
take
for 29. Yeah,
so much better. Wow, that's kind of insane. Does it have one for Tart? I didn't think I saw it.
It didn't have anything for Tart.
Yeah,
no.
Tart. That was the guy that another guy coming out of from the Titans.
Mm-hmm.
That was a guy that was like when he was cut. I think they cut him, didn't they?
Yeah.
Everyone was shocked that he was cut, and everyone was like
signed to Houston. Actually,
I want him immediately. Yeah, then they signed him to Houston, but he's still a free agent because that was the last year of his deal. He did sign with Houston, but when he was cut, it was like I'm shocked because he's so good. So he's definitely a guy to
here's another name.
And he's 26, so he might be up there, but in terms of cost.
Here's another name, and he's played with Vance Joseph before. He's also a former native of the state of native. He also played with the Denver Broncos before, but I guess you could say native. But he lives here. He lives in Colorado. He was found being all cheery when the Broncos beat the Cleveland Browns when the Browns came to Denver, and that would be Shelby Harris. So maybe Shelby Harris is possibly maybe an option again. But I feel like for that, like you would almost have to again, like you would have to go for like the Shelby Harris route and then sign, maybe say like your prized defensive tackle that you've been, being sought after, if you will. So I don't know. Well, what would you prefer? Would you rather go after, and this is a nice transition to like our X tier, like pass rushers. Would you rather sign, because the defensive line, maybe even in the interior, was such a huge hole this year, would you rather spend all that money on a defensive tackle, or would you rather spend that money on a guy who we all know, and Big Mike just dropped it into the chat here, but like, would you rather spend it on a guy like a Danielle Hunter? Because you and I have said it before, right? You and I have said it before that that pass rusher room, maybe there's a lot of potential in that room, but they lack a dog. Like they lack a dog, or like that veteran guy that can just be the sole takeover of games, if you will.
Take it over there, Danielle Hunter.
We
just need. What's that?
So you're thinking Danielle Hunter just in the sense of like,
I take Danielle Hunter. We haven't had the guy the quarterback should be afraid of since Von Miller. That's too long. You have to have that. Is the rest of the defensive line still a big hole? Sure. But if you could give me, again, he probably doesn't want to come back, but let's say Calais Campbell's like, you know what? I want to go back to Denver for my last 2 years, whatever. He's 37. You can get him cheap and go get Hunter. Done. And there was some smoke with us and Danielle Hunter before. I think I would take him. What would you do?
George Payne drafted him. I mean, it's worth mentioning that George Payne drafted him. There are familiar ties, if you will, for Hunter and Payton. And I'm not saying, it has a tendency to happen before, but there was, I don't know the name, but when TJ Ward signed with the Broncos, there was a person that was within that scouting department for the Broncos who pounded the table and drafted TJ Ward when he was with the Cleveland Browns. So it happens. Like, that's all I'm just trying to say. It happens that players possibly do go to teams where they know that person vouched for them. And so it's certainly possible that George Payton is that guy where, Hunter, and we know, and we've seen it in Minnesota that that Hunter, he was a big hit. And for anybody that knows that and wants to take a stab certainly at George Payton's, draft history, which that's a conversation for another day. But one of the positives, if you will, was Hunter. And I think that, Daniil Hunter is certainly one that you want to circle. Obviously, it's going to cost a pretty penny. But I will admittedly say is that, like, if you're going to go out and you're going to spend money, it better be those positions where you feel like are those weakest needs. And we just touched on a little bit, right, with the defensive line, the interior defensive line, or possibly a pass rusher, right? Because I feel because this could be far cheaper. It's going to be far cheaper for you to go and sign a cornerback too, to come in and be your cornerback too, aside from, Pat Surtain. We'll talk about those options in a little bit too. But if you're going to
go ahead.
No, it's just, if you're going to go spend that money, why not do it at a position that's on like the position tree, right? Like a position tree and one of the most valuable positions in the NFL, right? I mean, like, I think Gil Brand has mentioned so often that, one of your top positions is a left tackle, which of course we'll have that conversation. But the left tackle position or right tackle position, depending on its tackle position, quarterback and edge rusher, right? Those are like the three positions that he talked about. So if you can be able to do that and you can be able to finally spend that money, I would do it for a guy like a Daniil Hunter.
Yeah. I mean, another thing we can look at it, we'll get into the draft a little bit more probably later, but I think you need a guy that can get consistent pressure. Like, consistency has been our weakness on the pass rush side with pressuring the quarterback. That's been the biggest problem, is we haven't had that guy that can get there consistently and disrupt the quarterback. And Hunter is definitely a guy that can do that. If we are of the mind in the draft to trade down, I don't know. I feel like the pass rushers haven't been as prolific, or they just haven't been mentioned much compared to like the other positions. I feel like it's not as good of a pass rush class. Mm-hmm. But if you trade down and you can get a guy like, I'm gonna butcher this, but Laitu Latu. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, from UCLA.
Just say Latu.
Latu. That's another option. Like, you can go that route if you don't want to spend up on Hunter, but you have to do something at pass rusher in the offseason. The downside with Latu is, like, he technically did like medically retire from football and then came back. Like, he's a fantastic player, but that's obviously a concern. So it's something you have to kind of figure out what you want to do, because I feel like you have to make at least 2 moves on this defensive line this offseason in some way, shape, or form. You have to get a defensive tackle. You have to get at least 1 defensive tackle, and you have to get at least 1 pass rusher. And how you want to mix that up? Do you want to sign Hunter and then draft the tackle? Do you want to sign both and then that's your spending money in free agency? I don't know, but that's going to be, again, outside of quarterback. I think the defensive line has the you can make an argument that it is the biggest hole.
There's also another guy that we didn't get a chance to mention. He's also from the Minnesota Vikings, but also he is a guy who is rather familiar with Sean Payton, and that would be Marcus Davenport. And frankly, I think Marcus Davenport was a free agent last year, right? Marcus Davenport was a free agent last year. He just went and he signed with the Vikings, if I'm not mistaken, for like, was it like a 1-year deal or something? So, Davenport. I mean, he is certainly an option. 27 years old. So, I mean, like, if you're splitting hairs a little bit, and you're talking about Daniil Hunter, I mean, you're talking about a 29-year-old versus a 27-year-old.
Wow, but Daniil Hunter's better.
Yeah. But also the cost is going to be a little bit.
The cost is going to be a lot.
Yeah. So I believe it was Jair was in the chat, and he did roll T Higgins into the conversation. But if you were to, I feel like it's all about preference, and I don't think there's, and again, there's not a right or wrong answer to it, but like, I don't hate the idea, of going out and spending money again, and to use this, what we said about the defensive line, I don't hate the idea too of signing a pass rusher, despite what we just described, and possibly a room full of just maybe number two pass rushers, right? I almost said wide receivers, number two pass rushers, right? I don't mind the idea of going out and like, let's just say for the sake of argument, if it gets resolved a little bit with Von Miller, the off-field stuff with Von Miller, but he ends up getting released by Buffalo, given the season that he had with Buffalo. Say he they actually move on from him. I don't hate the idea of like still spending all that money on a primo pass rusher, and then given his current state of like where he is in his career, meaning Vaughn, did you almost, he began his career as Batman, right? But you almost turned him into a little bit of a mentor number two for that, number two units that's in that room.
You got to do something. I mean, that's definitely an option too. The
point I was just making is like making two additions. The point
making two additions.
Yeah.
You have to.
Yeah.
Oh, you have to.
We could re-sign Randy Gregory again.
Danielle Hunter's Batman. If you want Batman again, get Hunter. No, don't re-sign Randy Gregory, please. That's the only thing I don't want. I did say I did cheer when he made those plays in the Super Bowl because I was like, holy shit, he was actually relevant.
Yeah. Some other options, some big time options. As I said, Jair mentioned Brian Burns as an option. The thing to keep in mind with Brian Burns, this is the age question that's going to come into possibly a little bit of a better deal for Danielle Hunter and Brian Burns. Brian Burns is like 25 years old, so he's going to be wanting like a 5-year, 6-year deal for possibly $20 million. Like, he's going to be wanting that kind of deal. Danielle Hunter, he'll probably still get the $20 million deal. The question is just, is it going to be a 3-year deal, or is it going to be, 4-year deal, 5-year deal? What is it going to be? Because he is 29, right? Because he is 29. So what is that going to look like? But he's going to get a 20-some million contract. The options though are fascinating within here, because I mean, you do have Leonard Williams. He was traded to Seattle, but even that's going to be a pretty penny. But you go down, you got Carl Lawson, Marcus Davenport, Zadarius Smith down there in Cleveland. Yannick Ngakoue is fascinating. Like, Yannick Ngakoue is another fascinating name to file away. Chase Young, right? Chase Young with the 49ers. I don't know if the Chase Young thing for me is one where he's crazy talented. Like, he is crazy, crazy talented. But is he enough? Is he enough to be a number one pass rusher? That's my question. Like, that's my main question right now with Chase Young. My
problem with Chase Young is, like, would I have traded a 2nd-round pick for him? Yeah, probably. But will I pay him $12 million a year?
Yeah. Like, they project it for one year, $13 million right now is what his projected contract for Spot Track.
I don't know if I would do that, because I would probably rather pay, like, what are they projecting for Hunter? Is that on there? My internet's being slow.
I mentioned it earlier, but Danielle Hunter was projected.
What did they say that was?
3 for 60. So $20 million a year.
I'd rather pay him $20 million a year than pay $13 million for Chase Young. I mean, I don't even know if we can afford that, but I'd rather pay the guy that I know has proven that he can do it than the guy that he hasn't done that.
Yeah.
I would trade a 2nd-round pick for him. 100% I would trade a 2nd-round pick for him. But paying him in free agency, a little bit different.
And we didn't mention the other name, but that would be Josh Allen. Josh Allen's going to get the franchise tag. The defensive,
The other Josh Allen.
yeah, the other very very good Josh Allen. Yeah, he's going to get the franchise.
He's not available.
Yeah, he's going to get the franchise tag. Some other options, of course. Interestingly enough, they put Mike Purcell as a defensive end in here. We know that he can play the inside and he can play the defensive end. Yeah, Brian Burns. Chase on from Jacksonville is out there. Dante Fowler is there. Jadeveon Clowney, of course, is a famous name, but he won't sign in the first wave of free agency. He'll probably wait a little bit. That's what he's done the last couple of years. He'll probably wait and then sign with a guy with in training camp. Which by the way, to bring that point up, that's also an option for anybody that is maybe speculating on some of these moves. A guy like a Jadeveon Clowney, a guy may have a season-ending injury in that pass rush room, and then Clowney just comes in and steps right in. I think Melvin Ingram was another case like that, where he signed, with the team. Actually, Melvin Ingram, I think, maybe signed with the team during the regular season, right? I think he maybe signed with the team during the regular season. The ever so successful Brandon Klein Farrell, who was
how did you pronounce his name?
Calvin Klein.
Klein Farrell. Oh,
yeah, Calvin Klein Farrell.
Clown Farrell.
All
right, that's pretty rude. But I remember exactly where I was sitting when I watched the Raiders draft him 4th overall. That's all I'm gonna say. And I remember my exact reaction.
What about Shaq Lawson?
Is he a free agent?
Mm-hmm.
How old is he?
AJ Epinesa. Okay, so basically, I feel like it's basically just take anybody from the Buffalo Bills defensive line and take anybody from the San Francisco 49ers defensive line, basically.
I feel like AJ Epinesa has been low-key a little bit of a bust.
You're a bust. 2 years and $11 million.
Shaq Lawson, though, I'd take a flyer.
2 years and $11 million for AJ Epinesa.
Yeah, no, I'd rather have Shaq Lawson.
You got to also think the cost of and given probably with where the Broncos are, because I don't mean to use a Moneyball reference here on this, but it's like, could you spend less for 2 pass rushers, and get maybe the same production that you would for 1 pass rusher that you would actually get if you combined it with bringing in an AJ Epinesa in a, what is it? I don't know, a Chase Young. I'm not saying he signed Chase Young, but you do a Chase Young and an AJ Epinesa?
I don't know. I don't think you can, because
I don't think you can either.
You're not going to be. It's the consistency and the talent. That's the position where if you have one fantastic guy, that changes everything. If you have 2 meh guys,
yeah,
I agree. We've seen that. We've seen what that looks like. Unfortunately, we're in that position now.
Yeah,
and I'm not trying to hate on our players we have on edge right now. I think they're good. I don't think they're fantastic. I don't think they're even necessarily starter worthy. I think if you have a Von Miller level pass rusher and then a couple of rotational guys, you're in a much better position than if you have 2 fringe starters.
Yeah. I mean, I'm with you. I just felt like posing that question, as far as possibly looking at it from the, that room. I am curious to see what they'll do. We won't necessarily be shooting our shot as far as the, the guy that they will sign. I will say, if there is the possibility, and you mentioned it, I think if there is a possibility that the Broncos make a splash, and I think we actually even said it tonight, if the Broncos make a splash in free agency, it will not be on the offensive side of the ball. Yeah, it will not be on the offensive side of the ball.
I don't think so. No, I think if they're going to make the splash, they're going to be on the defensive line. I don't think you're going to see them take and pay someone on let's say the wide receiver room that's going to break the bank. I don't see that happening.
Yeah. And obviously we're not talking about the quarterback position in terms of a splash position, because we'll talk about that, obviously, of course, into the positions and, stuff like that in later episodes. But like, I don't envision them spending money. Like, if you're going to talk about a splash position, obviously the quarterback position is going to be number one at that, if you're going to be doing a splash move. But really, there's only two guys. There's only two guys that you would consider a splash move at that quarterback position. And we'll talk about it, in that episode, but it's Kirk Cousins and Baker Mayfield. Those are the two guys, at least in my opinion, that are like the splash move at that.
I don't think either of them are even going to be available.
But that exactly, and neither of them are going to be available. All right. So that'll do it for the offensive. The offensive positions of the wide receiver position and the trenches. The defensive
on the
line,
defensive side.
On the defensive side, talking about the defensive line, the edge rushers, the interior, the defensive tackle position. And I'll tell you what, because we kicked off with the defensive line, I feel like it's only fitting that we talk about the other side of the ball, the other side of the trenches. We get a chance to talk about the offensive line, and given some time and given everything that, we have, in terms of time on the show, maybe we'll put forth another position, of course, in there as well. But I feel like it's only fitting that we talk about the offensive line, and possibly, maybe what they will do on that offensive line, because that's going to be, I will say this, we just said, right, the Broncos aren't going to be a team that's going to be, spending the bank or a big money splash position necessarily on the offensive side of the ball. However, and this is a nice little teaser for next week when we do talk about the offensive line, if, and I mean if, the Broncos make that decision to move on from Garrett Bowles, you're talking about a situation where the Broncos may or may not be forced to not spend money on that edge rusher.
If you move on from Garrett Bowles,
I know
the trenches become, on both sides of the ball combined, the trenches become by far the number one hole on this team. And yeah. I think more on the defensive line still than on the offensive line. But Garrett Bowles has turned into such a good left tackle that, again, left tackle is one of those premium positions. If you don't have a good one, you're scrambling. And I don't think, as much as I don't know if he wants to stay, as much as I don't know if we can keep him, I don't want to get rid of Garrett Bowles until we at least have a consistently good player even on the right tackle spot. Yeah. Like, you can't go into a year, especially when you might have a rookie quarterback, with bookend question mark tackles.
Yeah. But that was what I was going to tease it, is that, like,
it's giving me Menelik Watson vibes. Go ahead.
Yeah, like if you move on from Garrett Bowles, just get yourself ready for that possibly being maybe the splash. Is that the Broncos going out and actually getting a left tackle? Because I mean, you can go out and you can roll out Cam Fleming, but to use the same term as we do for quarterbacks, he's a bridge left tackle for what it's possibly going to end up being for you drafting left tackle, or you feel like you're going to be drafting a left tackle at 12 and you're starting him immediately. So just prepare yourself for that conversation, that like the moment they move on from Bowles is the moment that you're talking about possibly the Broncos putting a splash move at that left tackle position, and maybe not
come on down.
Yeah, and maybe not a Daniil Hunter or Brian Burns, or anybody, that they feel like they want to actually spend that money for $20 million a year. So it's gonna be a fun conversation next week when we do have that conversation as far as the offensive line. So it's gonna be fun, and hopefully you guys can stay with us during that and all season long, of course, during free agency. Again, the legal tampering period begins March 11th, which we know is the, in air quotes, official kickoff to
The Coach Payton tampering period may have already started. Just kidding.
Yeah. It's really the kickoff, if you will, for NFL free agency, because that's when you typically see moves start happening. And actually, it's good that we're actually having this conversation now, because come the combine, you'll have a lot of general managers, a lot of people that are in that building. And so you will hear a lot of rumors and things percolating as far as what the Broncos may or may not do in free agency, who they retain, who they're actually looking out in free agency. You'll hear all of that come the NFL Combine, I'm sure. So we'll keep you all up to date, of course, right here on the MHRT Network and right here on the Manely Broncos Podcast. To everybody that chimed in on the chat, thank you guys so much, man, for hopping in with us, getting a chance to interact with all of us. Comments were great. Big Mike, you were great. Jair, you were fantastic. D-Rock, it was great to see you here tonight. So Clayton, of course, the super fan, was great to see you as well in the chat. Again, thank you guys so much. We hope you guys have a great rest of your night, and we will see you guys next Wednesday.
Fast lane when I pass in the street, bag of money in the passenger seat. Simcoe's been asking for me on the road from the west to the east. Way up, I might never come down, cause the coast racking up the flame out. So high, I might never come down, so what, this is my life.